A happy but haunting image of missing schoolgirl Charlise Mutton.
Happy birthday.
As her classmates prepare to return to Tweed Heads Public next week, a mammoth search is underway outside Sydney, looking for any sign of the 9-year-old who vanished in the Blue Mountains.
On Friday, January 14, 2022, 9-year-old schoolgirl Charlise Mutton was reported missing by her mother from a remote village in the New South Wales Blue Mountains near Sydney, Australia. Over the next week, police and emergency services searched for Charlise, but to no avail. 5 days later, on Tuesday, January 18, their investigation led them to the riverbank of the Colo River. There, investigators found a barrel filled with sand, and in that sand was the body of Charlise Mutton. The question that everybody was asking now was, who would kill an innocent child and dispose of them in such a heartless way? But let's backtrack for one moment to discuss who Charlise was, her upbringing, and the person that has been charged with her murder. And if you're new around here, hello, my name is Sam. This is my cat. Joining us again, Lola. I cover mostly Australian true crime cases, mostly solved cases. I do have a podcast if you want to listen to today's episode on the go. It is called Koala Crimes. And having said all of that, let's get back to today's story. So Charlise Mutton was born to her parents, Callista Mutton and Scott Hensby. However, her parents separated not long after she was born and her mother gained full custody. From this point, Scott had little to no involvement in Charlise's life, although I couldn't particularly tell you the circumstances that led to this decision. Over the next several years, Callista struggled with various aspects of her life, but her biggest struggle by far was her addiction to the drug ice. And in 2016, Callista made a mistake that would change her life forever. She took ice before getting behind the wheel of a car, resulting in her making a reckless attempt to overtake a semi-trailer and lose control of her vehicle. As a result, her friend and passenger, Karen Bunch, known as Kaz, passed away after 3 weeks battling for her life in hospital. Following this incident, Callista checked herself into a rehab facility, but it wasn't long before she was kicked out for threatening violence to the other residents. The following year, she was charged with dangerous driving occasioning death and driving with an illicit substance in her system, resulting in a 3-year prison sentence. And although in my humble opinion, she very much did deserve this sentence, the person that didn't deserve it was Charlise. To lose your primary parent in those vital developmental years, keeping in mind that Charlise was just 5 years old at this time, would be beyond devastating. So in 2017, Charlise was sent to live with her grandmother, Deborah Mutton, in Coolangatta, Queensland. And from what I can tell, this was pretty much the best thing that could have happened to Charlise. And it's pretty clear to me from everything I have read and researched that her grandmother adored her. And, I'm sure her mother loved her, but she just was not fit to look after her daughter at this point. And I couldn't tell you why Charlise was not sent to live with her father, because as I mentioned, there just wasn't much information regarding that whole situation. So upon her release, she reobtained her driver's license somehow, and she also started dating a man named Justin Stein, who she would refer to as the love of her life. And after what appeared to be quite a whirlwind romance, the pair became engaged in 2020. And from the outside at least, it appeared that Callista was getting her life back on track. Although from what I can tell, she never did regain full custody of Charlise. Anyway, let's skip ahead to the following year of 2021. Callista and her now fiance Justin invited Charlise to stay with them in New South Wales where they were living for that year's Christmas break. Keeping in mind that Charlise was still living with her grandmother at this time and had been for a number of years. I should also add that in Australia, our Christmas break is about 6 weeks and it's over the Christmas New Year period. I believe in the US, your longer summer break is June, July, because that's your summer. Just to clarify, she wasn't pulled out of school or anything like that. Anyway, all of this to say that Charlise was planning to spend from about December 2021 to sometime in January with her mother and her mother's fiance. Different reports do seem to suggest different dates, but it's not too relevant to the story. So the place that Charlise was actually invited to stay was this really fancy estate, about a 2-hour drive from Sydney in Mount Wilson, called the Wildenstein estate, owned by the Stein family, which was Justin's family. And the Wildenstein estate was this luxurious 12.5-acre, multi-million-dollar wedding venue that had been in the Stein family for over 20 years. So as you may have guessed, Justin did come from a little bit of money. And since we are on the topic, let's talk about Justin. Actually, let's start with who his parents were first, James and Anime, I think, Stein. They were both prominent antique and jewellery dealers in Sydney and actually owned a shop in Sydney's famous Queen Victoria building, although I don't know if it's actually that famous outside of Sydney. But anyway, they owned this shop in the QVB for about 30 years, and that was called Martin and Stein. Overall, Justin did have a pretty privileged upbringing. He went to a big fancy boys' school and was given many opportunities that not all of us are so lucky to have in life. However, at some point, Justin seemed to have taken a wrong turn in life. He made some bad choices, fell in with the wrong crowd, who knows. But in 2016, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in jail for possessing a marketable quantity of drugs. And in November of 2020, he was released after serving his minimum sentence, which was about half. And this is when his relationship with Callista began. Although that is actually somewhat of a guess on my behalf, because there seems to be no information out there as to exactly how and when their relationship started, whether she met him while he was still in jail or they met right after. But either way, they met around this time. So back to Charlise visiting her mum and fiance over the school break. During this time, her grandmother, Deborah, admitted to a friend that she was struggling with Charlise being in a different state and away over the holidays. I don't exactly know how she felt about Charlise being in the care of her mum, Callista, and Justin, but I do get the impression this was the longest that she had been away from Charlise since Charlise had been in her care, which I have no doubt would have been incredibly difficult for her because for all intents and purposes, she really had brought Charlise up. Callista, however, was said to be incredibly excited to be spending the Christmas break with her daughter for the first time in what I believe was quite a long time, although I'm going to say that COVID did have something to do with this as well, as they were living in different states. But regardless, Callista was very excited to be spending a considerable amount of time with her daughter and her new fiance for that matter. It was, I'm sure she was picturing one big happy family over the Christmas break. She was in love with her daughter, staying in a beautiful multi-million-dollar estate. What more could anybody honestly ask for? So Christmas has happened, New Year's happened, and we're going to skip about 1 week ahead into the new year when Justin, Callista and Charlise take a road trip down to a place called Lower Portland, which was about a 2-hour drive from the estate. There, the three of them stay at a rather run-down caravan park called the Riviera Ski Gardens, and they stay there for several days until January 11, when just Charlise and Justin return to the estate and Callista stays for an extra night at the caravan park. And the reason for them going on this road trip and staying at this caravan park, I couldn't tell you. I don't know why you would leave a multi-million-dollar estate, drive 2 hours away and stay in a rundown caravan park. It doesn't really make sense. I'm just going to assume they were visiting friends. But anyway, now I will warn you, the timeline does get a little messy around this point, but I'm going to do my best to make it make sense. So we can assume that Callista arrived back at the estate sometime on the 12th because, as I said, she stayed an extra night, and Charlise and Justin went back by themselves on the 11th. So on the 13th, the afternoon of the 13th, was the last day that Callista and Justin say they saw Charlise. They say that she was playing on the veranda of the estate and she was wearing a pink top, a black skirt and some black thongs, although they weren't exactly sure that's what she was wearing. I should also clarify, thongs in Australia is flip-flops in America. Just realised that may have been a weird thing to say to some of you out there. And I'm also not sure who actually last saw Charlise with their own eyes. Was it Callista? Was it Justin? I don't know. But regardless, it was Callista that rang the police on the morning of the 14th to report her daughter missing. Now, you're probably thinking, so Charlise, a young 9-year-old girl, goes missing. on an estate, a large estate, in a remote village. And her parents, well, not her parents, but her mum and I guess soon to be stepdad do not report her missing until the next morning. This is where things start to not add up. Because if that was my daughter and she was missing for even half an hour or an hour on a place where she doesn't live and there's no way that she's familiar with this huge estate. As I said, what did I say? What did I say? It was 12 acres? 12 and a half acres. So a pretty large property for a 9-year-old to go missing in and potentially even get injured. So why would you not have called the police on the afternoon or evening of the 13th? Anyway, she was reported missing on the 14th at 8:20 a.m. and a search pretty much immediately began. And also on the days that followed, the police did speak to Justin quite a bit about the day that Charlise went missing, the days leading up to it, and any potential information that he may have. However, they weren't actually able to speak to Callista because she was hospitalized pretty much at the same time that her daughter went missing for an undisclosed condition. There has been rumors in the press that she was pregnant, but we don't know. So she was unwell and in hospital, and therefore police could not speak with her. And of course, they also went to the Wildenstein estate to set up a crime scene and also confiscate several items for forensic testing, including a boat and a red Holden Colorado ute. That was Justin's red ute. And the search for Charlise, well, that was a challenging one to say the least. Police, state emergency service personnel and rural fire volunteers searched dense bushland and surrounding areas for 5 days, battling through some pretty bad weather conditions, including fog and rain. Police divers also searched a river in the area, and mid-search, the team also had to deal with a COVID outbreak, meaning that they had less people on hand than they had hoped for. And on the Sunday of the search, Charlise's biological father actually wrote something quite interesting on his Facebook wall or page or profile, whatever it's called these days, that seemed like quite the stab at Callista. He wrote, "Has anyone won the world's most hopeless person award twice? I think we have a repeat entry this year," end quote. Soon the homicide squad was also involved in Charlise's investigation, although they wouldn't confirm or deny if Charlise had gone missing under suspicious circumstances. They pretty much just said that their involvement was standard protocol when a child goes missing. On the 17th, reports came out that small footprints had been found near the property and that certain items had also been found, although these items were not named. But regardless, these reports gave friends and family hope that Charlise was alive and out there somewhere and had just become lost in dense and rural bushland. And of course, the investigation also spoke to neighbours, and one neighbour in particular, Carol, had some pretty interesting information. She said that on the morning of the 13th at 4:30 a.m, she was up reading her book when she saw a vehicle, or I should say she saw the shadow of a vehicle moving down the neighbour's driveway with its headlights off, and she thought that was pretty weird. She was fairly used to seeing cars coming and going from this estate, but she didn't usually see them with their headlights off. Unfortunately, though, she couldn't make out the make or model of this vehicle. And I have to say, I'm a little bit confused as to how a neighbour could see the driveway of a 12-acre estate, but I don't know, maybe the neighbour lived across the road or something and was sort of facing the driveway. That's my only sort of thought on that. And in the media, of course, Charlise's case did make national headlines, but police did remain pretty tight-lipped through the investigation. Unfortunately, all hope was lost when on the evening of Tuesday, January 18, 5 days after Charlise was reported missing, her remains were found in a barrel filled with sand on the riverbank of the Colo River, which was located about 1 hour from the estate. And what I found personally, one of the most shocking details in this case was the fact that the autopsy report revealed that Charlise had died from a single gunshot wound. And this fact alone brings up so many questions in this case. So if you're outside of Australia and you're not aware, the gun laws here are incredibly strict. Like, getting a gun license is no easy feat. So the question is, who had access to a gun or who owned a gun? And furthermore, who would be motivated to shoot a 9-year-old little girl? And of course, the manner in which her remains were found, as well as the way in which she was killed, shocked not only friends and family, but the entire nation. In particular, her biological father, Scott Hensby, was said to be incredibly distressed, posting on his Facebook page, "This is not the end of your story, Charlise," and he vowed to find the person that killed his daughter. A vigil was also held at Charlise's school, Tweed Head Public School, back in Queensland, where no doubt her young friends would have struggled to come to terms with the loss. And our Prime Minister even commented on this case, just to give you an idea of how deeply this case affected this entire country. So what exactly led police to the riverbank of the Colo River, given that it was a pretty obscure location and not exactly close to the estate? Well, they used CCTV and GPS tracking. More specifically, they tracked a red Holden Colorado ute, that would be Justin's red Holden Colorado ute, on CCTV, and used GPS tracking on Justin's mobile phone to track his activities in the days leading up to Charlise's disappearance and subsequent murder. And as it turned out, police had been pretty suspicious of Justin from basically the get-go. When they spoke to him during the investigation, his story just was not adding up. And when they began to dig a little bit deeper, a pretty clear picture began to form as to exactly what he was doing in those days leading up to her death. And it should also be noted that Callista had still not been questioned at this point due to being in hospital. So on the same evening that Charlise's remains were found, Justin Stein was arrested in a Surrey Hills unit and charged with murder. So let's backtrack for a moment and discuss what happened and the timeline of events. So police believe that Charlise was likely killed at the Wildenstein estate somewhere between 7 p.m. on Tuesday, January 11, and the next day at about 10 a.m. on January 12. And you may remember me mentioning earlier a messy timeline. So if this is correct, that Charlise was killed somewhere between the evening of the 11th and early on the 12th, that makes me wonder where Callista was during this time, because she was at that caravan park 2 hours away on the night of the 11th, but she returned on the 12th. So what exactly did Callista return to at the estate? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm not suggesting she knew anything, but considering that both Callista and Justin say that Charlise went missing on the 13th, so the day after that police believe that she was killed, and then on top of that she wasn't reported missing until the 14th, things don't add up as far as Callista's story. Again, I'm not suggesting anything for legal purposes. I'm simply stating the facts of this story as I've read it in the media. But anyway, let's discuss some of the facts that we do know, and that's what Justin was doing on the 13th, the day that Charlise supposedly went missing. There are a few gaps in the timeline, but police were able to paint a pretty clear picture between CCTV and GPS tracking. So on the 13th, Justin was seen on CCTV driving around in his red ute, towing a boat that came from his parents' estate. This boat was also one of the boats that was confiscated during the investigation. There was also an object in the ute that was covered in a blue tarp, and I will have a visual on the screen for those of you that are watching. At some point that afternoon, Justin visited the Bunnings Warehouse store in Marsden Park to purchase 5 20-kilo bags of sand, and during this shopping trip he also had a somewhat extensive conversation with Callista, although I don't know what they discussed in this conversation. At around 6 p.m. after his Bunnings visit, Justin drove to a nearby BP petrol station to fuel up the boat that he had been towing. After this, over the course of the evening, night and morning, he drove to several boat ramps, including the 5 Dock Bay boat ramp, where he remained from 7:20 p.m. to 9:50 p.m. He then visited the Windsor boat ramp between 1:30 a.m. and 1:40 a.m. As it turned out, this boat that Justin had been towing didn't actually work or start, or who knows, but he couldn't get it to work. And so police believe that Justin's plan had been to basically take the boat out into the river or into the water and dump Charlise's remains out there. But when he couldn't get his boat to start, he had to think of a plan B. And as you may have gathered, the object in his ute that was covered in a blue tarp was believed to be the barrel that Charlise was found in, meaning that Justin had been towing Charlise's remains around all day in his ute. So between 2:25 a.m. and 2:35 a.m. that morning, his red ute was seen heading towards the Colo River with the object, the blue tarp-covered object, still in the back of his ute. However, when he left the Colo River, that object had disappeared. The police also believe that Justin did actually plan to take the barrel and roll it into the Colo River, but it became wedged in the sand. And he basically just gave up and left the barrel right there on the riverbank for police to find a week later. So the next day, or really a few hours later, the 14th, it was when Charlise was reported missing by her mother. So Justin had been out all night disposing of Charlise's remains, and the next morning Callista reports her missing, but Callista doesn't know what happened to her daughter. So where did she think her fiance was all night? It so much does not add up in this case. It is incredibly frustrating, and it's probably going to get a little more frustrating, so buckle in. And going back to that neighbour that saw a car with its headlights off driving into the estate, I wonder if that was Justin sneaking back onto the estate. But we don't know at this point. So I do need to say that as of recording this video, Callista has not been charged with anything relating to her daughter's murder, and it is believed that Justin acted alone. But I guess you guys can give me your thoughts down below on what you think of all of that. Not long after Justin's arrest, he made a brief appearance in court via a video link in which we found out that he suffered from long-term mental health issues. Although these weren't specified, we do find out at this time that he was medicated for whatever these were. And Justin's parents have also had quite a lot going on since his arrest, and Annemie in particular, his mother, has received quite a bit of criticism for comments she made to the Daily Telegraph in which she defended her son somewhat and criticised Callista. She said that Justin had had a, quote, pretty tortured life, adding, "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink or choose their partners," end quote, which does seem like a pretty big stab at Callista. She also added in this interview in regards to what Callista was going through at this time, quote, "It would hurt anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. It would hurt you because parents know their children. And, you know, as I said, the mother is the one they really need to talk to," end quote. Definitely a very interesting interview from Annemie. She didn't really elaborate on the tortured life comment about her son, but she definitely had some interesting things to say about Callista. Since this time, the Wildenstein estate has been listed for sale, and the Martin & jewellery store has closed down in the Queen Victoria building. So it's pretty safe to say that Justin's arrest has very much affected his parents' businesses and livelihood. And a few weeks after Justin's arrest in February, a more extensive search was actually done on the Wildenstein estate, where they uncovered 2 firearms plus ammunition in the bushland surrounding the property, as well as other disturbing content. And it would turn out that these firearms were actually stolen, but we'll get into that in just one second. So following these finds, Justin was additionally charged with possessing unregistered and unauthorised firearms, possessing ammo without a permit, and aggravated break and entering company. Additionally, and even more disturbingly, Justin was charged with possessing child abuse material and interfering with a corpse. And in another strange twist in this case, it turns out Callista was involved in a break and enter in August of 2021, just months before Charlise came to visit her, and in a time where it seemed like she was getting her life back on track. And in this break and enter, she stole 2 firearms amongst other things. And in a surprise to absolutely nobody, it was Justin who was accompanying her for this break and enter, hence his additional charge of break and enter. Unfortunately, it is pretty clear in hindsight that Callista and Justin were probably the two worst people that Charlise could have been in the care of. But anyway, Callista did plead guilty to the break and enter charge, of which she was convicted, but spared jail time, instead ordered to undergo a year-long intensive correction order. And she was also attending a drug and rehab centre at the time of her sentencing. And in July of this year, Justin Stein pled not guilty to murder, and a trial date was set for May 6th of next year, 2024. And I, for one, cannot wait to see justice for Charlise and for anybody that was involved in her murder to be brought to justice. What really gets me is, why would a 30-something-year-old man want to kill a young and innocent girl? What was the benefit? It's not like Charlise was in their full-time care. They could have easily handed her back to her grandmother if they didn't want her around. Why even invite her up in the first place? Doesn't make sense. Nothing about this case makes sense. And that's what's so frustrating. Besides the weird timeline, what's the motive? What? Was it a sexual crime? Hopefully we will get these answers next year. It is clear to me, though, that both Callista and Justin had their issues, let's say, but to involve a 9-year-old girl in their chaotic life was just so wrong and infuriates me beyond belief. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all the fun stuff. And until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.